Welcome to the Black Girls Heal podcast, where we talk about changing unavailable relationship patterns, healing unresolved trauma, and building a healthy relationship with first you and then others. Every episode, we will talk about actionable advice that you can apply today to break unhealthy patterns and grow your self-worth. I'm Sheena Tubbs. Let's begin. Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Black Girls Heal. I hope that this finds you well and thriving and shining wherever you are, because you are the prize, my dear. You are wonderful, and we are better by having you here. So, with that said, there's a very special announcement that I have. It might be a little bit of a week late, but it is very important. And that announcement is that we are officially in Sagittarius season. That's right, Sagittarius, which is your girl's sun sign. My birthday is December 7th, and I'm super pumped. I will be 37, and I'm calling it my prime year because it's prime. You get it? Yeah? Okay, and I'm going to be in my prime? Yeah? Okay, thank you. I'm happy that you enjoyed my joke as much as I do. But I am so excited for this 37th year because my 36th year provided so much growth, so much expansion, so much knowledge that I gained about myself, about my relationships, about what works and what doesn't work. A lot of stretching, but also a lot of healing as well, a lot of acceptance, and a lot of lives, y'all, that I got to touch and impact. And I just look forward to making 37 an even bigger year, an even better year, a year of even more growth and expansion, and finding ways to support and help women grow in new and different ways. One of those things that I actually generated this past year with that intention, because I know that I get messages from women who are consistently looking for tools and support related to what we talk about here, because this podcast talks about healing relationships. And of course, there's an emphasis on romantic partnerships, but we talk about all types of relationships here. We talk about our family relationships, our friendships, of course, romantic, but also our relationship with ourselves, which is the most important. And I thought it really important to create some tool that every woman, no matter if they are working with me directly or not, whether or not they are in therapy, whether or not just financially they're not at a place, that they will be able to have access to it. So we started off with the Healing Circle Workbook this year, which was so great, and y'all really enjoyed it. And so in 2022, I plan to write more Healing Circle workbooks, and so y'all will hear about that. For those of you who don't know, in episode 55, I talked about creating healing circles with people who are in your peer group to talk about the things that we talk about here, just to have peer support and connection and accountability, and learn how to process these things with people who love you and people who want the best for you and people who support you. So we have one workbook already available on Amazon that you can get. Just search for a Black Girl Healing Circle workbook, and it should be the top result. It's a pink book. So it has a pink cover, and we'll be doing more about, or I'll be doing more about self-love, about relationships, about boundaries. And so I can't wait to share those with you in 2022. And then also what I'm most proud of, because I've already been getting messages from women who've received it, is our Love Woman co-planners and card deck. And let me just focus on the planner. So one thing that I consistently teach y'all is how important it is to balance not only taking care of you, but also taking care of your relationships at the same time. And I think often we feel like we have to pick between the two. Either we can only focus on us and go into our own little self-love detox bubble, but we don't actually know how to connect with other people, how to balance being open and receptive, because it's just too overwhelming and stimulating, or we don't know how. and we'll either go back and forth between being avoidant or being love addicted or being codependent, by focusing fully on our relationships and forgetting ourselves, and then going into places of deprivation and not resting and not knowing how to play and not knowing how to prioritize all the things that we as women want in our life, right? We have ambition, we have goals, we also have a desire for love, and we also have a deep need to fully invest in our own self-love at the same time. We have a really deep need to know how to tell what relationships are available and what are not. And we all want to grow and flourish in our everyday life without feeling as if we have to neglect ourselves. And so one thing that I did this year, in addition to the Healing Circle workbook, is I pulled all of the things that I teach y'all about relationships, about balance, about self-care, and combined it with the fact that what some of my students had told me is that they wanted to know how to maintain all the things that they were learning in therapy and in their everyday life and in their friendships and in the other places that they were getting support and coaching in, and needing a practical way to implement that to keep everything top of mind. So I put all that together in a daily planner. So an actual legit planner with monthly calendars, with weekly calendars and daily calendars, with the sticker sheets for those of you who love to decorate your planners with stickers, with beautiful drawings representative of us and how we show up in the beauty of our culture, and then also making it a restorative and healing planner as well, or a healing workbook in a way as well. So the planner comes with quarterly sections that talk about how to evaluate your relationships, how to set goals for your relationships, but also in every quarter, how to set goals and standards for yourself as well, how to prioritize your rest and your play and your vacation and your self-care without saying, okay, this will be a nice to have one day, but actually fully doing it for yourself and putting it on the calendar, and it being something that's actually something bite-sized versus this big grand thing that you're trying to accomplish, which makes you feel very unsuccessful when you're trying to balance all the balls in the air. So like I said, I've sent out the first set of planners and journals to women. And like I said, we have a card deck as well, which basically has weekly challenges for each of those 4 relationship domains: family, romantic, friendship, and self-love. And I've already been getting videos back from ladies. I've been getting texts back from ladies. I'm getting pictures back from y'all about how excited you are to have it, about how beautiful you feel like it is, for how well it has been structured. And I cannot wait to lead y'all through this planner in 2022. You can get yours by either going to thelovedwoman.co, and that's .co, not .com, thelovedwoman.co, or blackgirlsheal.org. I added a button at the top that says Shop Our Planners. That will take you directly to the shop to order your planner and get it before the holidays, or if you're listening to this after the holidays and we still have some items available, then you can purchase them then. So can't wait to connect with all of you and support you in that process. So that is that. Now let's talk about today's episode. So today's episode is all about family estrangement, in regards to this month being really a reset month, and a month that we are all evaluating our past year. Right now during the holidays, we have a lot of triggers around us for those of us who may have more touchy or distant or toxic relationships with our family members, or maybe sometimes it's just really painful because there's distance. There's not a lot of yelling, there's not a lot of fighting, but you're definitely not as close as you would want to be. And so this episode was so great. Our guest is therapist Violetta Fernandez, who is incredible. She's an expert on family estrangement, and she broke it all the way down for us, how this shows up in our family, what this has to do with culture, how do we cope through the holidays, what this can mean for ourselves and how we see ourselves. And it is chock full of information and support and validation. And she was generous enough to share her story with us. And even that was healing in itself. So I can't wait for you to hear it. And I hope that you learn a lot. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump on in. Okay, so on the podcast today, I have Miss Violetta Fernandez. Hey, Violetta.
Hi, Sheena.
How are
Thank
you?
I'm actually really excited to be here with you today. A year ago, I was the first time I ever heard about your work. And it's funny, I came across the post where I posted an interview you had on somebody else's about love addiction. And so who would have thought a year later that I would be on your podcast? So I really appreciate you inviting me to talk about a topic that to me, I just think is so important. So thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you for joining us. You do such a great job talking about this. So I can't wait to learn more. So let's go ahead and just jump in. Today, we are talking about family estrangement. And I would love if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your relationship to this work.
Okay, well, again, Violetta, you can call me V, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a mental health therapist. I currently work in private practice, and I have experience working in community mental health. And my experience is working with BIPOC folks, queer folks, and my specialty is family estrangement. I first came into this specialty based really on my own experience. And then as I was doing more research, I started to gain the language with what I was going through. And it to me made so much sense. And then I felt like, okay, this is something I could spread awareness about.
Yeah, and I think this is really important to talk about, especially at the time that I'm recording this and the time that the podcast is going to come out. It's in the holiday season. And this is a time when
Mhm.
family relationships are, if they're negative, then it's very palpable and
Mhm.
people feel it a lot more. So let's talk about what is family estrangement. How do you define that?
So, family estrangement is the loss of closeness and loss of family relationships. Typically, it will either be emotional, the loss of emotional closeness, or physical closeness, or both. And then it can be intentional or unintentional. There's different reasons why people will either choose family estrangement or experience it, perhaps being discarded or rejected by their families. And so, as far as why it happens, it typically is a history of abuse, neglect. It can also be a difference in values. It can be the decisions we make. So, for some of us, it will be our identities. It will be as far as maybe our politics. It can be marrying outside of your race, leaving religion. But either way, there's a rejection or also rejection and just that loss of closeness by family.
Mm, wow, that got really deep. Just
Yeah.
listing all of the different reasons that family estrangement can and does happen. And
Mm-hmm.
also the part where you said that it can be intentional and unintentional. And what I make up
Mm-hmm.
about that is sometimes estrangement can happen because there's a very deliberate, maybe overt
Mm-hmm.
conversation or experience where the family member cuts ties with you, and sometimes it's unintentional. And
Mm-hmm.
what that means to me is that you just feel the distance, but maybe they don't actually say that to you, but you just know
Mm-hmm.
that something isn't right. Is that correct?
Correct. So I think a lot of times you can feel the lack of emotional support. And I think honestly, I think you feel that early on. But I think for a lot of us, we struggle to understand it, and then we struggle to even say, okay, well, this relationship isn't serving us as we get older, and if we have that choice. So we will just stay in that dynamic of uncertainty. And so you can feel the distance. And for some, it will be like, okay, they will make the intentional effort of remaining distant or then just going no contact.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is really important to hear stories too, because I think when we hear what other people have experienced, it makes us feel not alone. I think when we are estranged from family, either by choice, our choice, or whether or not the family member chose, it feels very shameful and it feels embarrassing, as if we did something wrong, even if it had nothing to do with us. So with that said, could you share a little bit more about your story?
Yeah. So with my story, I want to say that I had gotten to a point in my life where I was just so fed up with the relationships I was in when it came to dating, with friendships too, but more so with dating. And so I thought, well, I know something's wrong. We'll say, at that time, I thought something's wrong with me. I didn't understand attachment. I didn't understand boundaries. And so then fast forward, when I was going through a breakup is when I first started to understand the concept of boundaries. And then I started to hear a little bit more about attachment styles. And so at this time, my mom was sick. My dad was her caregiver. And at that time, I have two brothers as well. And so as I'm progressing in my career, mind you, at that time, I lived in Los Angeles. My family lives in San Antonio, Texas. At that time, as she's sick, there starts to become tension. And I also start to question, like, hey, what's going on? Like, I start questioning about mental health, about the behaviors with my parents as my mom is becoming increasingly sick. So at that point is when I started to get a lot of resistance from my parents. And in my family, you don't question the parents. In my culture, a lot of times you're not questioning parents or authority figures. You just go with the flow. But some families aren't so, they're not so harsh about it. And so, but my family, because I did grow up in a narcissistic household, resistance was calling me names or trying to silence me, and then permitting me from talking about mental health. So there's so many ways in silencing me. And so finally it got to a point, I remember being talked down to, and I simply said, I don't like the way you talk to me. And that was when my dad said, I will talk to you however the F I want. And for me, that just always stands out. My mother was silent. She was always very complacent and not. I just got to a point where I can't live like this anymore, because now I knew more about boundaries and attachment. And now it was just so much harder to ignore. And so I then was like, okay, I made the intentional act of, I won't be staying at your house for the holidays. And from there is when, because I was less accessible, I would say within days, my dad announced to the family, I no longer have a relationship with you, meaning me. And then that was the discardment. That was not the first time. I think at this point I was just exhausted, and I just was like, okay, like I just felt defeated. And at this point it's the day after Christmas. So it was just so confusing. And honestly, I could not believe that this was happening to me. It wasn't until that distance was created that I was able to gain clarity. It took months to gain clarity and realize what I had actually been conditioned to believe, what had been normalized. So this didn't happen overnight. I just never challenged any of the behaviors. And so that was showing up in my personal relationships. So now I thought, okay, if I want to start healing in my like dating and friendships, I'm going to have to address the wounds that have been created by my family. And so that's how it really then became me understanding family estrangement more.
Wow. So you said, first of all, thank you so much for sharing that. I really,
You're welcome.
your story. I can relate to a lot of it. So
Yeah.
when you said, there's so many different questions that I have about that. When you said that it took you months to just gain a little bit of clarity from the shock of what happened, what
Mm-hmm.
helped you during that time to reground yourself?
It's one of the things was there's two big things: hobbies. I love making wreaths. At that time, it was Christmas wreaths, but I love making wreaths. Having a hobby was very therapeutic for me because it helped. What I didn't know at that time, but what it was doing, it was helping to regulate my emotions. It was slowing me down. And so I could get, in some ways, lost in a hobby. I was learning my capabilities. Friends were like, I didn't know you were this creative. And I'm like, me neither. But you start learning more about yourself. And I think that's what increases like your sense of autonomy, your confidence, and then having support through community. My friends, I consider them my chosen family. And so they were very reassuring when it came to boundaries because I really didn't know if I was enforcing boundaries. Um, they would just be really reassuring. And I just remember them telling me, for parents that that care, in this way they put, for parents that care about the relationship, they will adapt. It might take them a few times, but for those that don't care enough to adapt, you will find out, you will know. And so after that, really, it just was up to me when I wanted to let go and accept that my parents, they were not interested in a relationship with me. It wasn't about me, but it still was painful. And I will attribute my clinical side to being able to cope with that. But my human side had a lot of wounds from that, in which I had to go to therapy.
Yeah. What I didn't hear you say, which I really love, is that you didn't try to act like it didn't matter, and you didn't push it down, and you didn't
Yeah.
gaslight yourself to say this isn't that big of a deal or that's just how he is, but you actually let yourself say, I don't like this, and also don't like their reaction, and do I feel
Mm-hmm.
like what they said is actually true, and being able to
Mm-hmm.
reassess that for yourself.
Right. Thank you for pointing that out because I was 39 years old when I was discarded the second time, the final time. And I think for me, probably maybe that helped because at this point I was just so fed up. I believe in my younger self for sure. I would have allowed family to convince me that, oh, that I would hear that, oh, that's just how they are. They love you. They're just going through a hard time and they just want you close by. I would hear so many comments and pressure. But at this point, even though at times I had some self-doubt, like, why did I have to say anything? Or I would blame myself a little bit. I still would not allow myself to be talked down. So even at times when I try to reach out and say, hey, we can try to work this out. Um, when my dad would start talking to me really ugly, I just got to a point where I even blocked him. I just never re-engaged with him. Even after my mom passed away, I never allowed myself to re-engage in the toxicity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think what happens, and tell me if you agree or disagree with that,
Mm-hmm.
with this, is that sometimes we can think when we have toxic family or even, toxic relationships, of course, but toxic family is that if we just give it time and we try
Mm-hmm.
a couple years, things will be different. Or
Mm-hmm.
that before you were 39, thinking, okay, if I just play the game, if I just
Mm-hmm.
I'm supposed to say, then everything will be nice and everybody will be calm. But that's not actually how it works out. Someone
Mm-hmm.
who is unhealthy is always going to have that unhealthy mindset because they don't have their own internal boundaries. So it's really about you figuring out what it is that you want and what you need and showing up that way.
Yeah. And, I think it can take us several times. So, for instance, a lot of what you'll see is this cycle of cycling in and out of estrangement. It's a push and pull. So, if you ever wonder, in general, people wonder, why am I in this push and pull dynamic when I'm dating or with friends? Well, it's, I think, likely happening in your family relationships. And so it's a lot of parents will bait their children back into having a relationship with them, but yet they will still continue to repeat controlling behaviors or just, not being supportive of their children. And this applies to siblings as well. And so I think just like in dating, we have that hope they're going to change. that will also happen with family. We hope it will get better because we do have those good times. We do see potential at times, but it is going to be a matter of recognizing that consistency and reciprocity, those have to be ingredients for a healthy relationship.
That's really great. What else are important things for us to know about family estrangement for those of us who are just getting the language for that for the first time, or maybe we're at an age where we're starting to consider maybe it's not me? What's some other things for us to have to know?
Okay, I would say so. I'll get usually the question of when do I give up? How do I know when to let go? I'm tired of it going through this. I say first, know that there's no right or wrong way to go about this. There may be some of us that will decide to keep in touch, but we're just going to be distant. We're just not going to share intimate parts of our lives. Those are like the soft boundaries. And there will be some that will decide to go no contact. And it's okay. Either one that works. And I think sometimes families will even know that distance actually is better. So it's one, notice how your body responds with every interaction you have with a family member. And afterwards, notice that I'm really big on somatic work of how your body responds. The second thing is, are your needs being met? I think for a lot of us, especially adult children, is we go back because that familiarity and they meet certain needs, but the way they're being either not met or the way they're being met ends up being more harmful than good. So in that case, if we can come to terms with like, there's a lot of limits to this relationship, then I think it's time to start seeking more support through community and having your needs met there. And then I think when you start becoming less dependent and go outside of the family, then I feel like you gain a more sense of independence and less reliance of emotional support for your family. Not that maybe there wasn't much anyways, but maybe it wasn't consistent. So those are going to be, those three things always come to mind when it's like, how do I perhaps make a decision of where I want this relationship to go? And do I want to consider cutting this relationship off? Or do I want to be more intentional with how I show up in this relationship?
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about friendships. And I'm assuming you're meaning female friendships primarily.
Mm-hmm.
How does one start the process of exchanging or replacing their blood related family with their chosen family and creating just as deep relationships with them as they had before with their blood family?
That's actually a really good question. I find that healing is going to be really important because we don't want to carry over the same toxic patterns into our friendships. I think seeking therapy, learning more about your attachments and how you let go of unhealthy attachments. You're also looking at just how healthy relationships work, because I think a lot of us put so much focus into dating and into families that we're not putting a lot of time into nurturing friendships. So if we want to avoid repeating same patterns in our chosen family, I really do encourage people to start by just increasing their knowledge on healthy relationships and getting therapy or getting involved in the community so that you can also diversify the people that you're meeting in your lives. Different people will bring out different versions of us. So it is going to be really important for us to know how to respond to them by gaining some healing through this process of estrangement.
V, you just said a word and I wanted to interrupt. I was like, we're not face to
Mm-hmm.
face. So I had to let you get it out.
Say it again.
I had to let you get it out. So when people say, when you said different people bring different things out of you,
Mm-hmm.
that just hit me because that
Yeah.
is so true. And
Mm-hmm.
so true that you'll be triggered different ways, that you may be
Mm-hmm.
more comfortable with some people versus others. Can you talk more
Mm-hmm.
about that?
Yeah. So, it's funny. I started to come to this realization actually when I started to actually feel a little bit of a way about certain family members keeping in touch with my parents and my siblings. But I learned actually, and I learned this through the polyamory community, is how different people bring out different versions of us. And I think this helps with jealousy. This helps with feelings of insecurity that, you know, we'll say like, obviously like my therapist or my coworker, my friends, we will be able to emotionally relate on different topics. So for some, it's going to be ice cream. For some, it's going to be about family estrangement. For some, it's going to be about goal setting. So I feel when we just feel more secure about our own identities, we are that much more receptive to, I think, accepting that people are going to meet their needs. I'm not always going to be that person to meet the needs, and vice versa. And so that's why I feel like it helps to have a chosen family, so that we can let go of that dependency on family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's not everybody's, and I will say, we're conditioned to think our family is everything. So it's okay to think like initially like, oh, they are going to meet everything I need. And we carry that into dating. But actually, those are just, we're born into families. So we're internalized. So much of our identity is centered around family. So that's why we don't learn a lot about friendships, because family is what we're conditioned to believe is all we need. And in some cases, that was the case when our ancestors and even our parents were trying to survive trauma. That collectivism is what helped us to get through. So yeah, just a little bit on that.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And we had Danielle Ballard Jackson on maybe a couple months ago now, talking about friendships and building healthy female friendships. And one thing that she said that was really important is that you need to also give it time, because I think with the subconscious psychoeducation that we have about relationships, not only that family is everything, but also we're raised to believe that friendships just happen and they're automatic. And so if you don't have friends, that there's some kind of failure on your part, or there's something you're doing wrong, versus sometimes relationships or friendships are just relationships that need time to nurture and grow and go deeper in and build trust, especially if you've never done that with them before.
Yeah, it does. It takes time and skills. It takes skills, right? People skills to nurture these friendships. And so if we come from families where we don't trust outsiders, it's again all about the family. Or even like my mom, she didn't have friends. To her, her own trauma didn't allow her to build those friendships. And so some of us have gone down the path of we're going to mimic those. We're going to mimic that. We're not going to have friends either. We think closeness is very uncomfortable. It's kind of like in dating, that closeness is uncomfortable. Same thing in friendships. But for some of us, we're going to go the opposite way and give me all the friends. However, we don't want all the friends. We want to be more selective. So it definitely takes practice.
Yeah. And I know you're listening to the podcast, so you're going to understand. So we move from one extreme of being super avoidant to being really addictive. And you need everybody to like you and everybody to be around you, and all this attention and distraction from maybe this self-rejection that you have. And you're kind of hoping that if enough people like me, then I'll like myself. But that's not how it works.
Yes, that's actually a great point. Yes, it's one extreme to the other, which again, it makes sense. And I hope listeners know, like, it's not our fault that we perhaps were conditioned to believe these things or feel this way, but we can change it. And it just takes practice and knowing more about our needs. And that is one thing I will say. Family estrangement has forced me to learn more about myself and learn all the things that I'm capable of, and just you learn more about your own identity once you start to separate that from the narratives that family may have about you.
Yeah, I totally picked up that one of the first things you said when I asked you how you coped was that you built hobbies, and it wasn't about distraction. It was exactly what you just said, that you needed to figure out what was your identity outside of your family and this role that you've been trying to play all that time.
Yeah, I love hobbies, so I could go on and on about that. But I never thought, it wasn't even intentional, and it's interesting how I think for me, living alone, being single, it did allow me to focus on myself. And it was only by chance that I had an opportunity to make reads, and I noticed I thought I really like this, but I did have to be intentional about devoting time to that. So yes, that definitely has been so helpful.
Okay, I want to ask you this, and if I can't
Mhm.
ask it, I can cut this part of the
Okay.
episode out. But
Okay.
we're talking a lot about building relationships and building connections. Talked a little bit
Hmm.
about the pattern in dating. So was there
Hmm.
ever a part of you throughout this healing process that you did try to seek connection in romantic partnerships to fill that gap, or were you just more aware of what you were feeling, so you were more
Hmm.
um, discerning about that?
Oh, oh, actually, I like that you brought this up, and I don't mind sharing this. I think now what I know now is that I think I would try to heal my parents through dating. Especially like I think as a clinician, I would what we call intellectualize. I would rationalize, and that is one way we do cope with family estrangement is we will rationalize why our parents or family members are the way they are. We're like, okay, they're trauma, we just have it all figured out. But that's not the same as tapping into wounds, emotional like inner child work. It's not the same as attending to those emotional wounds that develop. And so one way I tried to do that was trying to heal partners. And so that has just probably been the story of my life. And even after the family estrangement really started to develop, once my parents had discarded me, I did seek that through dating. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But you were able to break out of it. What helps you
Yes.
stop the pattern?
Well, what I will tell you this, what helped, and I hope nobody waits for this, was that I was always pursuing individuals that were emotionally unavailable. But it wasn't until I entered therapy in January of this year that finally stopped. Now, at the same time, I am very career focused, and with my friendships that I haven't invested a lot of time in dating to test my what I consider my new set of skills. But there have been opportunities where I could have jumped into something, and I'm just said no, thank you. But therapy, I did trauma work and the inner child work, healing. That has helped me significantly, and it is such an investment. I recommend anybody when if they're able to, when they're ready to seek therapy, so that we can stop seeking healing through partners, because that just ends up being a big mess.
Yes, yes. Or you do meet someone who's super amazing and available, but you can't actually receive it because
Mhm.
you have the problem believing that you're worthy of it.
Right. And I think also, I will tell you this, I think for a minute there, I would get overwhelmed at the thought of somebody being close to me. I'm not, my brain is not used to it. My nervous system is not used to someone being available. So that is going to be for me the next adventure is when I actually feel uncomfortable with somebody, there's probably a chance that it's the closest I'm uncomfortable with and maybe not them. But when I recognize that, that will be the test for me as far as becoming comfortable with somebody who is emotionally available.
Yes, yes, that is so great. Love that.
Hmm. Oh, and
Um,
I can't believe I forgot this. I cannot believe I forgot this. I also joined one of the support groups that you had, and that helped so much, because let me tell you, and I don't know if maybe people can relate to this, but I think even though we may have so much knowledge, just reinforcing, like by hearing somebody talk about it and also being in a group where you can feel the energy, it just feels right. And there's so many support groups out there, but you can tell when it's the right group for you. But I just wanted to say that was really helpful, was being around others that I knew could relate to what I was going through, because it can be very lonely, because you do feel like something's wrong. I would think, well, something's wrong with me. And that is what family estrangement does, because it's so ambiguous. We doubt ourselves. We think, well, something must be wrong with me if my own family, that I can't keep family relationships.
that's awesome. Yay. I'm so happy to hear that. I'm so happy that that
Mhm.
was a healing agent for you. That's
It was.
awesome. So, yeah, let's go back to talking about that family estrangement
Mhm.
and some of the different players or the different ways that it can show up. So, just to go back to your story a little bit, when
Mhm.
you were talking about the things that your dad said, it also stood out to me, your mom and
Mhm.
her silence while that was happening, and
Mhm.
how the silence can be just as hurtful as the actual words that are said.
Right. So I didn't, it's funny. My mom would always come off as this really no nonsense person. Um, I always, I would always describe her as difficult. I didn't know the language. Now I know my mom really presented a lot of narcissism. And so she saw a lot of like protection and acceptance from my dad. And so with both of them having, they had such a toxic and a lot of domestic abuse in their marriage. What I started to realize is she was going to pick my dad over me. Her silence, I can't think of the darn term, but um, that to me is another reason why people become estranged, is when their family members, it's like they don't care. And I cannot think of the term right now, but it's just like you're not getting anything out of them. And so silent treatment had been used. It was constantly used growing up, and it would go as far as like a month. And I hated it. And to this day, I think it's still a little triggering. But her silence to me, it was so hard for me, because on one hand, they're not saying, okay, we don't want you here, but they're not standing up for you. And to me, that was really important, that I needed my mother to do that, and she wasn't doing it. And so I would try more with her, but I just would sometimes not even get a response, or it'd be really short text message. And then she passed away. So that can leave like a lot of no closure there, but I'm working on that. But yeah, her silence was definitely weaponized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with that, again, I am so sorry to hear about the passing of your mom. Grief is one of those things where time doesn't really, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter at the same time,
Yeah.
especially around the holidays. So
Yes.
how do you encourage your clients to cope during times like this, like the holidays, when
Mhm.
family relationships are um, more around us?
The holidays can definitely be really triggering, because they're centered around family. And there's a lot of family activities going on, and those are the common narratives you'll see depicted in movies and shows. So what I also find is, um, I find that there tends to be a lot of trauma centered around um, the holidays, because of like people being triggered by the holidays. It's like this vicious cycle. So for a lot of us that have been triggered by the holidays, surrounding yourself with community is going to be really important. And then also starting your own traditions, your own rituals, that is really important. And for those of us that perhaps we don't want to pretend like our family didn't happen, for some of us, there were some times that we hold dear to our heart. We may want to connect through our family through certain activities. Let me tell you, my mom's favorite color is purple. Like everything is purple. She even has it on her tombstone. So, for me, I might wear something purple. Just is my way of connecting with her in a way that doesn't harm me. People will find what works for them. So those three ways are typically some of the coping strategies that I recommend.
Yeah. And if I can add to that, in addition to the strategies that you just shared that have like some of
Mhm.
the acceptance, I also want to
Mhm.
normalize it in these instances. It's also healthy to sometimes have some things that you want to do or need to do that distract you from it if it is too
Mhm.
painful. I remember when the first couple of years after my mom passed away during Mother's Day, that I would
Mhm.
always have a trip booked. And I didn't realize it was happening until the third year. And I was like, I I always have a trip abroad or someplace else on Mother's Day weekend. Like I was subconsciously doing it, and same thing around Thanksgiving. And so it took
Mhm.
several years for me to be able to get to a place where my body, my nervous system, like you were saying before, allowed space for me to regulate and to come down and to be present in those moments. And I think that's what I needed at that time too.
Yeah, no, and my condolences to you because the loss of a mother, oh, that just is another topic. But um I think for us, look, we're just trying to survive. And so if that means booking a trip, if that means just, I don't know, I know people who are just not going to even observe Christmas, whatever works, whatever I think helps you to survive that isn't harmful, then I am all about that.
Yeah. What would you say, and I think you hit on this already, but just to double back on it a little bit, what would you say about other family members' opinions and how to cope with that? So, family members who are outsiders who
Mhm.
observe through their own perspective what is happening or not happening with maybe your parents or your siblings, and they have opinions on it. How does someone cope with that if they're feeling overwhelmed or not listened to?
Oh, that's a good question. So one of the ways that people manage family estrangement is going to be limiting their social circle, and then also putting limits in how they interact. So, for instance, I'll tell you, I have extended family members that hang out with my dad. Well, I really don't hang out with them. To me, I just don't have, I mean, we weren't that close anyways, and that's fine. So I will limit my contact with them, and it's from afar, maybe like on social media. And for someone like a family member that my daughter, she has a relationship with my dad. She has her reasons why she's maintained that. I try my hardest not to ever project my feelings onto her. And I think there tends to be an understanding that I'm not going to go probing. And then with her, my daughter's never ever shamed me for not having. She knows. She understands. But for other family members, where they perhaps will make comments or would make comments, I would say that you can warn them. You can tell them one time that if you say that again, I will need to leave, or I'll need to end this phone call. Or you can simply tell them up front, like, we don't have a relationship. I would rather not hear about them. Or if you're going to hang out with them, I would like for you not to share information about me. Or I will see you. We can celebrate Christmas at different times. You go with them at this time, and we can do it at a different time. So again, those that care will adapt to your boundaries, and those that don't, well, you will decide if you want to have contact with them.
Yeah, yeah. And also what you shared with what you have done with family members as well. If you
Mhm.
weren't already close to people to begin with, you don't have to try to make something happen just because you are blood related. You get to choose who's in your inner circle and who's your family. And one of those qualifications is respect, and that they
Mhm.
value you as a person, that they like you as a person. It's
Mhm.
it's really interesting. A conversation I kind of have with my students a lot is whether or not someone loves you can be very different to whether or not they like you. And what
Mhm.
that can look like is a parent or a caregiver or family member just going through the motions and doing what they're supposed to do. But you feel energetically that they really don't like you as a person, that they don't value you, that they judge you, that they feel that you're less than. And if that's the case, it's okay for you to acknowledge that they
Mhm.
don't see you and that doesn't make you feel good, and you get to choose your proximity from there.
Yeah, and I love that you bring that up because I don't think we know how to distinguish the two sometimes. And it's so crazy because my dad would tell me, I love you, but I don't like you. And I didn't, again, it was just so normalized. I took that, oh, well, he's just upset right now. Uh, but it was such like this message. And again, we just, I think that's where we end up like applying that to other relationships, like, oh, it'll be okay. That's just how they are, kind of attitude. But yeah, if you don't like the person and you are blood related, I mean, if you have, and also if you don't have anything in common, I think it's just unlearning that belief that we are that people are entitled to us. They're not. But that is so deep rooted that sometimes it takes a while for us to unlearn that belief.
You just said a word. How many of us are in relationships with people that we don't even know if they actually like us, but it's so normalized to just have substandard connection because of our family. And so we think we actually have the best that we can get. Meanwhile, and we're blaming ourselves about why we don't feel fulfilled or why we feel lonely in the relationship or why these things are happening when now, sis, you're connected to the wrong person.
Right.
You know, they're the problem,
Yeah.
not you.
Right. Yeah. It's so interesting. Sometimes I'm like so fascinated by this because I'm just like, it's so, I guess sometimes like, gosh, where did this belief come from? Which I know, but it's just sometimes really hard to believe that I used to fall for that. But I know it wasn't my fault either.
Right. Right. Well, I know this is such a good conversation, but I know we're getting
Yes.
out of our time. So I did want to save time to talk about the cultural impact. So you talked about with your cultural background, which if you can share that when you have a moment, but with your cultural background, just the importance of the heavy emphasis on not speaking back and respecting your elders. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that affects family estrangement or how that shows up?
Oh, yes. I love this topic. So one thing that a lot of us fear standing up for ourselves. And the reason we fear that is because we know our cultural and our family beliefs. And those beliefs tend to stem from the respect for authority, for religion. And if we go against that, we will be shamed. And what upholds those beliefs tends to be it tends to be in my culture is the machismo and what we call marianismo. And it is that women will self-sacrifice to uphold the man's his primary needs. And so this expectation that also children, that whether they're non-binary, whether they're boys, whether they're girls, is that they will self-sacrifice for their parents and God. And so in my family and in my culture, if you even think to reject any of those beliefs or resist any of the anything of what you're told to do, you will again be rejected, you will be disliked, you will be ostracized. You may suffer. If let's say you rely on family, which is in my culture, we're very collective. If you rely on family, then you may suffer by less financial support, again, less emotional support. And so either we have gone through it early in childhood, we pick up on it fast, or we see it done to other family members. And because we internalize our family and culture, when we see rejection by family, it creates such a fear and doubt about our place in the family that we would rather just not make any waves. We would rather just not say anything. And so that's how culture and family plays into the fear of distancing ourselves or ending family relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So your background is Mexican, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So with that, do you see in your clientele or in your family and your friendships or just people around you, do you feel that there's more, I don't know if necessarily more is the right word, but I'll say it, but if feels like there's more obligation to adhere to those standards with your clients who come from immigrant populations, because of wanting to pay back that respect for what your parents or caregivers sacrificed for you or, whatnot. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think there tends to be more pressure. I will say, like with immigrant families, um, I know it'll like depend on poverty levels because again, the collectivism is where we rely on each other for survival. And so the pressures of taking your family out of poverty, of also then meeting family obligations. So maybe that's going to be taking care of parents as they age, meeting expectations of what you're going to do with your life, basically will definitely put a lot of pressure into self-sacrificing in dealing with abuse, dealing with emotional abuse. Because sadly, our parents went through worse and they went through the same thing. And when I recall with my mom, my grandmother did not talk to her for getting married. She was angry with her. So, but my mom cried and cried and would beg her. So there was that expectation that I too would have to self-sacrifice. So I believe, just from what I've seen and read, is that there tends to be more pressure with children of in immigrant families.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I mean, everyone who listens to this podcast has a connection to their culture.
Yeah, yeah.
Across
And
the African diaspora, obviously, we have South Asian women who listen, Latino women who listen, women across all over. So, what
yeah.
would you say to us who because we're so connected to our culture, but we also are valuing our mental health and our self-respect and our emotional stability? How do we cope with that feeling as if we are dishonoring our culture or dishonoring our elders, and still wanting to honor them, but feeling like it's detrimental and dangerous to do so in the way that they want us to?
Oh, that's such a good question. Because even though it really is a lot of pressure for children of immigrant families, I mean, it can still be heavy, even if you're a third generation, fourth generation, right? And I think what I find is that we do grieve culture because our families are almost like these gatekeepers to our culture. And so when we have lost family members to estrangement, we also grieve our culture. So with that said, I think knowing that culture also evolves. It evolves. And so I think looking at it from that perspective is knowing that when you are changing this cycle of trauma, and what, like we always hear, any intergenerational trauma, we are part of creating change. And because we absorb family, our younger family members, they will also see this. We are modeling for the younger generation of a healthier family, or a healthier way of living in our culture. So with that, I think that's where you get to also create your own traditions. And again, is looking at families in redefining what family means to you as well. And so I think it's just a matter of stepping outside of your family and diversifying yourself with experience and with people. And again, having that perspective that you are actually empowering your culture by changing the cycle of violence that leads to family estrangement.
Yes. Generational trauma does not have to be a part of our culture.
Right. It doesn't.
We pass down. Absolutely.
Right. It doesn't have to be anymore. And it will be painful, but at the same time, you get to reclaim your narrative, you get to reclaim your identity, and you get to reclaim your voice. And I just think, even though my mother was harmful, I know she didn't just wake up like that one morning. I know I'm doing this for her. I'm doing it for my grandmother, because they were not allowed to use their voice. They would have been shut down in a heartbeat, and probably in a much more violent way. So.
Yes, yes. I love that, balancing the mercy and the empathy with also self. So this has been such a great conversation, V. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much too. I really appreciate this convo. So thank you, Sheena.
Yes. So before we end, can you share with our listeners where they can find you and learn more about you and your resources?
Sure. So I have an Instagram page. It is terapista _ Violetita. I'm going to, well, actually, you can probably put that on the summary, but it's terapista _ Violetita. I have a TikTok, but I really barely have like one thing on there. But Instagram is where you'll find most of my content, and you can find a link in my bio as well. But yeah, that's how people can reach out to me, by messaging me there, or even emailing me through the link in my bio.
Awesome. And are you taking clients? Do you have any programs if anyone wants to work with you?
I currently have a wait list for individual therapy, but I just finished the first support group. I just finished the first series for the support group. It's called Together in Estrangement. It is for BIPOC and queer folks. At this time, I'm about to start the second group, which it looks like we won't be starting until about January now. But yeah, that is definitely a place that I welcome. BIPOC folks, queer folks to come and share their experience with family estrangement. It is a peer support group. It's not therapy, but that is something that I have going on.
Love that. Yeah. Well, I will have all of that links in the show notes for anyone who wants to participate.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Hope that you enjoyed it. Again, all of Violeta's information will be in the show notes. And just to bring it back to our announcement at the beginning, if you are looking for tools to help you with your family relationships, in addition to building your friendships, your romantic partnerships, and your self-love relationships, and you're needing a practical tool to help you engage in that over this next year and keep it centered, our Loved Woman Co-Planner is the right next step. So you can order yours for yourself or for you and a friend. We have bundles and discounts available by going to thelovedwoman.co. Again, that's .co, not .com, or blackgirlsheal.org, and clicking on shop at the top or shop our planners at the top to be taken to our store. So that's it for this episode. I hope that you found it helpful and it helps guide you through the season that you're in. That's it for this week, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. Hey, so thanks for listening to today's podcast. If you enjoy what you learned today, it doesn't have to stop here. Check out the Black Girls Heal website at blackgirlsheal.org for more resources to help you heal from intimacy disorders like love addiction and love avoidance. The best time to start or restart your healing journey is now. You can grab a free copy of our 5-step roadmap to heal love addiction, love avoidance, and love deprivation by going to blackgirlsheal.org/roadmap. And if you're on social media, feel free to follow us at Black Girls Heal on Instagram and Facebook.